The Holy Inquisitions of the Catholic Church began in the 12th century and were created to root out and punish heresy throughout Europe and even the Americas. Spanning several hundred years and arriving in different manifestations in many countries, the Inquisition was infamous for the severity and variety of its tortures, especially the targeted persecution of Jews and Muslims. Perhaps the worst variation of the Holy Inquisition was in Spain, which dictated daily life, politics, and instilled fear for 400 years, resulting in some 32,000 executions. What were the Inquisitions? What was the Spanish Inquisition? And how did it end?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Starting in 1184, Pope Lucius III sent selected bishops to southern France to track down heretics called the Cathars. This sect denied the divinity of Christ and practiced their faith outside the doctrine of the Church in Rome, which was considered heresy. But the Cathars were not alone in being targeted. During the same period, the Church also pursued the Waldensians in Germany and northern Italy. In 1231, Pope Gregory charged the Dominican and Franciscan orders with tracking down heretics. Almost like a plague, the inquisitors would arrive in a town or city and announce their presence, giving citizens a chance to admit to any heresy. Those who confessed immediately were punished, with sentences ranging from going on a pilgrimage to a public flogging or being placed in the stocks. Anyone accused of heresy was forced to testify. If the accused heretic did not confess, torture and possible execution were inescapable. These accused heretics who were denounced were not allowed to face their often anonymous accusers. The accused received no counsel and were often the victims of false accusations and vindictiveness. They were frequently ignorant of the charges against them, and confessions were often obtained through coercion, confiscation of property, threats against family members, and, more often, torture. Inquisitor Bernard de Guy wrote the influential guidebook, basically an operations manual for inquisitors called Conduct of the Inquisition to Heretical Depravity. Guy himself pronounced over 600 people guilty of heresy, resulting in tortures and executions. Guy was featured as a character in Umberto Eco's novel and film of the same name, The Name of the Rose, and was portrayed by actor F. Murray Abraham. There were many abuses of this great power, such as Count Raymond VII of Toulouse, who was well known for burning accused heretics at the stake, even though they had confessed due to torture. Wealthy landowners who were denounced lost their lands to other nobles or even to the Catholic Church. His successor, Count Alphonse, also confiscated the lands of the accused to increase his riches, so denouncing someone for financial gain was an easy way to get wealth. The greatest single example was on Friday the 13th, 1307, when King Philip IV and his hand-picked enforcer, Pope Clement, launched their inquisitor. Philip owed the Templars billions of dollars in today's money, so rather than pay, he decided to kill his lenders. Together, Clement and Philip were involved in the mass arrest and tortures of some 15,000 Knights Templar in France alone, resulting in thousands of executions. The edict went out all over Europe for nobles and rulers to arrest the Templars wherever they could be found, and some nobles resisted that order, such as King Edward II of England. Perhaps the most famous victim of the Inquisition was Joan of Arc, burned at the stake in 1431 in a murder that was politically motivated. However, the church had its eye on Spain for the simple reason that the Muslims had controlled the country for almost 700 years. In the late 1400s, King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella of Spain believed corruption in the Spanish Catholic Church was caused by the Jews who had converted to Christianity, called conversos, to avoid persecution. These converted Jews were also known as Moranos, and they were perceived to be an even greater threat to the social and religious order than those Jews who had rejected being forcibly converted. The medieval mindset blamed these conversos for every event that was detrimental to the people, such as plagues, famines, droughts, miscarriages of pregnant women, poisoning people's well water, and abducting Christian boys as forced converts, and taking children in general to make their bread. Ferdinand and Isabella, as well as many Europeans, believed that many conversos were secretly practicing their old religion. There was also the political climate, since the crown needed to assuage their angry Christian subjects, who demanded a harder line against the conversos. This was considered critical because Spain, like most kingdoms, did not have a large standing army, so conscriptions would be sent out as well as requests for volunteers to join the army. Ferdinand was planning his great crusade against Muslims to expel them from Spain, launching his main attacks against Granada. Ferdinand was a man of his times, and he needed money. The Inquisition would serve several purposes. It was to pacify the Christian majority that something was being done to the Jews, especially the converted hidden Jews and Muslims. The Inquisition also allowed Ferdinand to confiscate the wealth and land from any and all persons who were accused of heresy, which would fund his military campaign to expel the Muslims from Spain forever. But Ferdinand needed a hitman, someone who could fulfill his wishes, satisfy the needs of the Catholic Church, as well as strike fear into the hearts of the population and impose a ruthless and indelible mark upon Christian Europe. The Spanish Inquisition started in 1478 when Tomás de Torquemada, at the time a minor priest, was consulted on the subject and, along with the crown, created the Tribunal of Castile to investigate heresy among the conversos. Initially, the tribunal was focused upon providing a much stronger Catholic education for conversos, making certain that they understood the Christian faith and all of its sacraments and teachings. However, as war against the Moors seemed to loom closer, called the Reconquista, that focus changed in 1480, and as a result, the Spanish Inquisition was formed into what we know it as today, and it was modeled after the previous Inquisitions in France, Italy, and Germany. The records reflect that in 1481, 20,000 conversos confessed to heresy hoping to avoid execution. Following Bernardo Gui's playbook, the inquisitors made it part of their penitence that they denounce other unknown heretics. By the end of that year, hundreds of conversos and even thousands of family members denounced Christians and Jews and family members, and many were burnt at the stake. Again, referring to Bernardo Gui's manual for inquisitors, Torquemada began a unique program. The Jews in Castile were forced into ghettos and were separated from Christians, their homes and lands confiscated, and then the Inquisition started. The Inquisition expanded to Seville and other regions, creating a mass exodus of conversos out of Spain. Many of the conversos fled to Rome and had audience with Pope Sextus IV, believing that the practice of targeting the converted Jews was destroying the Christian mission of conversion. Sextus came to the conclusion that Torquemada was wielding too much power and that Ferdinand himself was using the event as a pretext to steal land and wealth. In 1482, Pope Sextus appointed a council of bishops to take command of the Inquisition in Spain. They were to monitor and investigate the methods and rationale for the purges. Ferdinand resisted, seeing the great accumulation of wealth taken from the accused heretics as being a very good business. Under the guidance of Ferdinand, due to his ruthless methods and efficiency, Torquemada was then named Inquisitor General and he established his radical courts all across Spain. He used torture chambers, which were windowless rooms underground where the sounds of what was occurring were muted. This method was already popular around Europe for several centuries. Torture chambers were used so as to not terrify the population but to gather information. The torture was not random. It was precise and choreographed, and the inquisitors ceased tormenting their victims whenever they concluded that pain would not yield useful or truthful confessions. Information gathered from torture was not used as sole evidence. These confessions were compared to trial testimonies in related cases, so the tribunal could build a stronger and more coherent case. In essence, torture was primarily used to confirm previously gathered evidence as opposed to trying to collect new evidence, but sometimes that was divulged as well. In the New World Spanish colonies, these were rarely used due to the great expanse of terrain and the fact that those locals who were to be converted to Catholicism or punished for refusing would be dealt with in the public forum. This was when torture, already allowed under the Church in certain conditions, became standard policy, and it routinely used various forms to elicit confessions. Torture by fire, suspension, meaning hanging someone by the arms tied behind their back, sometimes over a fire called the strappado, but had variations. The variations on the strappado included using weights that caused more resistance and pain. The inverted and extended shoulders would separate from their sockets. At times, jerking the hanging victim would cause the shoulders to break. An especially torturous variation on the strappado was tying the wrists of the accused in front along with the ankles, then adding weights before pulling the victim off the ground to hang. Reports of its use during the Inquisition had the entire process completed in about 60 minutes or less. A person's threshold for pain would have ultimately determined the strappado's success of eliciting a confession or at least useful information sought by the tribunal. While death was not usually the result, permanent nerve, ligament, and tendon damage was likely to be a result. Many times, others awaiting torture in order to get confessions would be allowed to watch as a victim underwent various forms of torture. This was psychological warfare in order to save time and hopefully have them denounce others. Another form of torture was the wheel, combining the method of the rack, which stretched the body, and strappado, which resulted in stretched and torn joints, ligaments, and broken bones. The public sentencing of confessed heretics was called the auto de fe, a Portuguese word, basically meaning to be confessed in public, where the heretics wore a sackcloth or hair shirt over their heads with a single eye hole. Those heretics who refused to confess were burned at the stake, with any chance at an appeal thrown away. In many cases, starvation was also used as a method of torture. However, not everyone was on board with these methods, and there were revolts against the Inquisition. For example, in 1485, an inquisitor died after being poisoned, and another inquisitor was stabbed to death in a church. Several inquisitors simply disappeared. In retaliation, Torquemada managed to round up the accused assassins, burning 42 at the stake, although ex post facto evidence seems to show that many of those arrested and killed were in fact innocent of the charges. In true form for any dictatorial egomaniac, Torquemada sealed his own fate when, after running out of high-profile targets, once most of the conversos were either dead or fled Spain, and with the Muslims expelled in 1492, and in order to keep his own job, he investigated members of his own clergy for heresy, charging a few monks just to keep the story alive. Ferdinand and Isabella issued an edict on March 31st, 1492, giving Spanish Jews the choice: exile or baptism. As a result, more than 160,000 Jews who were not converted or arrested were expelled from Spain. The result of his heavy-handed methods was a flurry of complaints to the new Pope, Alexander VI, who believed that Torquemada required a heavy hand to rein him in. Torquemada was no longer the sole judge, jury, and executioner. He was forced to share the leadership of the Inquisition with 4 other clergymen until he died in 1498, which was under mysterious circumstances. The number of burnings at the stake by Torquemada was exaggerated by Protestant critics of the Inquisition decades later, but it is generally estimated to have been about 2,000 people that he killed this way. Following Torquemada, Diego de Deza took over as Inquisitor General. He is historically overshadowed by Torquemada, but he was even more ambitious and corrupt. He expanded the search for heretics and arrested hundreds of accused heretics, including members of the nobility and local governments. Some of the wealthy were able to bribe their way out of imprisonment, torture, and death, reflecting the level of corruption under de Deza. As bad as Torquemada was, at least he could not be bribed. After Queen Isabella's death in 1504, King Ferdinand promoted Cardinal Gonzalo Jiménez de Cisneros, the head of the Spanish Catholic Church, to Inquisitor General in 1507. Jiménez had been a Torquemada appointee in Granada and was famous for persecuting the Islamic Moors with ruthless efficiency in Valencia and Aragon. As Inquisitor General, Jiménez pursued the fleeing Muslims into North Africa and convinced Ferdinand to continue the military action. They invaded and they captured towns in Morocco, establishing the Inquisition until Jiménez was dismissed in 1517 after years of complaints from prominent conversos. The Inquisition continued unabated and extended into the New World colonies of Spain. Under the Supreme Council of the Spanish Inquisition were 14 local tribunals in Spain and several in the colonies. There were Inquisition tribunals in Mexico and Peru, which were notoriously ruthless. The Spanish Inquisition spread into Sicily in 1517, but efforts to set it up in Naples and Milan failed. In 1522, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V brought it into Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg in order to eliminate Protestantism that erupted after the Reformation by Martin Luther in 1519. However, these efforts to wipe out Protestantism were unsuccessful. King John III of Portugal, with the permission of Pope Paul III, introduced a tribunal like the Spanish Inquisition against Portuguese Jews in 1536. John III's methods were so brutal, it led to the Pope to revoking the grant. But the Inquisition was definitely established in Portugal in 1547, at which time its scope and power was also widened based upon the Spanish model. The Inquisition underwent a major reorganization during the reign of Philip II from 1556 to 1598, and effective control of the Inquisition was placed into the hands of the civil authorities rather than the clergy. After the papacy of Clement VII from 1523 to 1534, priests and bishops were often themselves judged by the Inquisition. Once again, even the slightest accusation, whether warranted or not, could lead to a person's arrest, torture, and death. There was an appellate process created as a result of the many complaints of abuse, but these appeals still were usually held by the same clergy who had invoked the arrest and punishments originally. Over the centuries, the Inquisition lost its bloodlust, but it was still in existence. For another 150 years, the Catholics in Spain used the Inquisition to attack suspected Protestants with equal effect. The Inquisition was running out of victims, as well as public support, until the Spanish Queen Regent, Maria Cristina de Bourbon, issued a decree finally abolishing the Spanish Inquisition on July 15, 1834. That's a long time.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please click like, subscribe, and share. Send us comments and show ideas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.